Welcome to Not Your Ordinary Parts, a podcast where we talk about hard things associated with the human experience with the goal of increasing awareness, growth, and healing. You may hear information from professionally licensed therapists, life coaches, healers, doctors, etc. This information is not medical advice or therapy and is not meant to replace actual therapy or instructions given by a doctor or personal therapist. I'm your host, Jalon Johnson. My guest today is Nicole Arzt. Nicole is a licensed marriage and family therapist, writer, and creator of the wildly popular psychotherapy memes platform, a space that blends sharp insight with raw, unfiltered honesty about the realities of being a therapist in the modern world. She's also the author of Sometimes Therapy is Awkward, a book that has resonated deeply with clinicians and clients alike, not because it promises perfection, but because it makes space for the mess, the doubt, and the deeply human experience of showing up for others while still trying to make sense of yourself. Nicole's work does more than just pull back the curtain on therapy. It rips the curtain down and invites us to look at what happens when people doing the healing are still healing themselves. Her voice is one of radical transparency, compassion, and humor, reminding us that therapists aren't gurus or flawless fixers. They're people navigating their own challenges, fears, insecurities, and growth, and often in real time. Through her writings, memes, and advocacy, Nicole challenges the idea that therapists have to be blank slates or emotional superheroes, and she redefines what it means to be professional by honoring what's real: the burnout, the awkwardness, the fear of not being enough. And by doing so, she gives permission to everyone in the mental health space to be whole, not perfect. So, Nicole, welcome to the show, and thank you so much for being my guest.
Thank you. That is quite the intro. Very flattering. Thank you. Thank
You're
you.
welcome.
Excited to be here.
Also, I did give a brief introduction, but so that the audience can get to know you a little bit better, would you mind giving us a little bit of background about yourself and how you got to who and where you are today?
Absolutely. Yeah. As you mentioned, I am a licensed marriage and family therapist. I have been working as a therapist a little over a decade now. I live in Southern California, born and raised. This is where I have my practice out here. Before having my own practice, I worked in a really diverse range of settings where I really got my footing as a therapist, got to sit and witness so many different types of humans and so many different types of backgrounds, and just really deeply strive to understand what it means to be human, what it means to sit with pain, what it means to hold and witness people's stories with care. I always talk about my work as being a very, very deep privilege. It is something I'm so deeply passionate about. I love what I do, and it has been really wonderful in being able to transcend into so many different other opportunities: my writing, my consulting, my speaking, my advocacy within this field and within mental health as a whole. Um, so yeah, that's what I'm doing on the ground floor over here.
Thank you for sharing that. And thank you so much. Um, what's it like to be a therapist who knows the theories, teaches the tools, and still has to admit that healing is ongoing, messy, and sometimes downright awkward?
It gets easier with time. I think, like many clinicians early on, I felt duped. I was like, wait, I'm a therapist. I should be cured and have all the answers, and I should be able to cure everybody and give them all the answers. And what a rude awakening, right? With time, that settles. It's a very much a human walking with another human kind of metaphor coming to light, and being able to just share presence and witnessing and love with the people I work with. But yes, there is sometimes like that existential reconciling of, oh wow, like there's a lot of pain. There's a lot right here. I can't necessarily take it or fix it for you. Um, and we're gonna have to sit in that discomfort together too. So it's all of that, interwoven, spontaneous, and messy at times, very messy.
I think the fact that you acknowledge that it's a deeply human experience is something that can allow for your clients to actually probably relate to you better. Is it what's it like for your clients to know that you're working together instead of you being the one who has all the answers and them coming to you to, get fixed, so to speak.
Mhm. I think what it offers is a sense of grounding, and my work is very deeply relational. So I don't ever come in assuming I'm an expert on someone's life because I'm not. I'm getting maybe an hour or so with that person a week. I'm just getting a window into their soul and into their story. And I think it's quite dangerous for a therapist to assume that they have the answer for how people should live their life. It misses the nuance of so much context, culture, values, upbringing. My job is to help clients achieve a sense of clarity within themselves to A, set the goals that they want to have in our course of treatment, and B, just feel really unconditionally held and supported as they navigate those goals. Quite frankly, they may not meet them. I don't mean that to be cynical. I mean that because life is hard and sometimes it's really important to have space to really unpack like, hey, what's really getting in the way of these goals being met? What's really happening underneath here? And you're still worthy of care and nurturing and processing. And so that's where I find that the human part of being a therapist offers such an important attunement for people just being seen in their own messiness.
Mm. Thank you for sharing that. And it's so true. Um, Something that I find, I guess, really great is that you stress so much the therapist side of things because that's not something that we as lay people get to see.
Mhm.
And you've often described yourself as a recovering perfectionist and a serial overthinker. When did you first start noticing that your mind was moving faster than your ability to process what you were feeling?
Mm, young, very young. I remember distinctly feeling different from other children and thinking about things very deeply, um, very heavily in ways that felt disproportionate to how others were experiencing it. And we live in a society where if we're not careful, perfectionism is very commonly reinforced. So it was one of the first ways was able to secure validation in the world, and that felt really good. And so it kind of grew its own legs, like doing more, achieving more, um, trying to be the best at certain things. And as I would say to a client, as I would say even now, like I wouldn't consider myself cured by any means. Those desires absolutely come up. I am not above the need for validation. I'm not above wanting to do the best I can in a situation. And I am not above overthinking, on a pretty regular basis. I think what's different now is there's a lot more acceptance for those parts of myself. There's more compassion for them as well. I understand what roles they try to embody, what function they're trying to have in my life.
Mm. Were there ever any spaces where you could just exhale and just feel like you were you, or were you always constantly working to be something to get that validation for those parts that you mentioned?
Mm, such a good question. I know some of like the most important relationships with some really good, solid friends was kind of the first catalyst of just like feeling safe and feeling landed with, okay, I can just like let my guard down. I'm loved for who I am. Meeting my husband back when I did over a decade ago, like that was such a secure base of, okay, I am unconditionally accepted. I'm loved here in this space. I know I've been in therapy for a long time, different therapists that has been felt, not all therapists, but in the spaces where I could get there. Um, there's such a healing energy felt there. And I now know that those spaces are not everywhere and I don't feel them with everybody, and that's okay. But to have just a few of them, to have that high quality space, oh, it's everything. It really is.
Mhm. Thank you for that. I think therapists do their best to define what it means for others to be okay.
Yeah.
What would you say okay meant for you then, as opposed to what it means for you now, where you are in your life and your career?
Um, That's such a good question. I think for a long time, okay felt very defined by achievement and external measures, like getting the degree, the job, the money, the status in a sense, like proving worth felt really okay. Um, and again, it feels really important to name that that still matters. Those things still feel good and have their merit. Okay now is a little more ephemeral. It's a little more somatic. I can feel times when I'm like really grounded within myself, when I feel safe within myself or with other people. I feel a sense of flow and connection with what I'm doing, things feeling authentic, meaningful, even when they're sometimes stressful. So, okay is in some ways more abstract now, but I can feel it more in my body and in my mind together. Whereas I don't know if I had that connection in the past.
Mhm. I think emotional fluency is something that a lot of us didn't have growing up. Feeling our feelings or being
Mhm.
able to name them was probably like trying to speak or understand a different language for a lot of us, especially me. I know it was. And you
Mhm.
say now that you have this connectedness and this groundedness where you can actually feel it in your body. Can you remember when you first started to realize what you were doing when you were feeling your feelings? And also when you realized that there was power in naming them?
Honestly, my first experiences were in my own therapy, a very good depth-oriented therapy where I couldn't out-talk the therapist
Mm,
essentially, and I couldn't overanalyze without that being brought into the room that was so healing for me. Um, and it's been some time obviously since then, but I distinctly remember how uncomfortable it felt, how much I rebelled against it. I was like, I don't need to name my feelings. We just need to like fix this. Like, let's move. The impatience that I had and that a lot of my clients have, which makes sense, when we're in a state of distress, we just want that relief. And it can feel kind of pointless. Like, what's the point of saying that I'm sad? Who cares? Like, I just don't want to feel this way. Um, but in that learning, okay, I need to practice at times naming, slowing down, sitting with, validating, grounding, allowing myself to seek support, be compassionate. And all of these unfolded in very slow ways with like lots of ups and downs, and they still do. I think it's a very ongoing evolution. But yeah, I would say my first modeling was in my own therapy experiences.
it's funny that you said you couldn't out-talk what was happening, and I think a lot of us do that out of necessity or even survival because
Mhm.
feeling our feelings can be unsafe,
Very much
um,
so.
especially if we have a trauma history or we've
Yes.
never had space for safety or, authenticity, and I think when you have the space like you had in therapy and you realize, "Okay, well, I can't do that now," like, it was probably like a defining moment for you. Do you remember when you also felt the need to share that with others and give others that space, even if it was before you became a therapist or before you had the tools? Or was it once you became a therapist that you realized, okay, now I can do this for others?
It's hard to say because I think it's a little bit of all and a little bit of none all at the same time. And what I mean by that is that I think, like most therapists, it was much easier to give than to receive. It's much easier to encourage someone else to sit with their feelings and to strive to be like a holding space for others, being regulated, being grounded for them, but struggling to do it for yourself. That kind of idea, like you become what you need. And so
Mm,
I know from a young age that was um, something that I worked hard to become. Because again, there was also validation in that. Like I learned, oh, friends like me in that role. People like me when I'm a good listener, when I give good feedback, when I'm gentle, when I'm patient. So that of course started long before the career. But there's kind of a thought, right? Like among mental health professionals that you take a client as far as you go. And that is often why it is so essential for us to do our own work because we have to know what that discomfort at times feels like, what moving through that depth feels like, what our own limitations feel like, and ideally working through those allows us to have a lot of empathy as we're sitting with clients, helping them work through them. Um, and then we trust the process more Not because like, oh, we've done it, so therefore they can do it, but because we understand and respect the process in such a personal way.
Something you said just stuck with me. You said you take a client as far as you can go. Can you explain what that means and what that can look like?
Yeah, it's kind of this idea that you have to be willing to kind of face your own demons and look in the mirror and look at yourself and reconcile your own hardships, your own traumas, your own perceived deficits. I could go on with like what those terms are, but we all have them. And in therapy, in this work, you will be confronted with them pretty regularly, pretty quickly, and pretty sharply. And if you don't do your own work on them, what often can happen is it just shows up with how you actually are trying to intervene with your clients. You can become avoidant, you can become overly permissible, you can be so wrapped up in your own feelings about it that you're not really there and present for your client. You can have an agenda because you think, oh, okay, like this is my experience, therefore it's going to be your experience. And sometimes what I notice is people kind of lose compassion because if they haven't done their own work, they're like, oh, what do you mean it's hard to change? And it's like, well, have you ever sat down and tried to make a change in your life? Because change is really freaking hard,
Mm.
right? Even when you know every morsel in your body's like, I got to make this change. Like, I needed to do this yesterday. I needed to do this 10 years ago, but I'm still stuck. If you don't know what that discomfort feels like, it's hard to tap into what that might feel like for a client. And on a logistical level, there's something to be said about being in the client seat and being able to step into that vulnerability, being able to be in that power differential, so to speak, being able to notice, ooh, what does it feel like to be like really seen by another person? Because that can bring up a lot of feelings too.
Have you ever had any clients that came to you because they went as far as they could go with a therapist who hadn't necessarily done the work to be able to hold space for them?
Yeah. Yeah, many. In fact, now a lot of in my practice, I work with therapists. So I end up as the therapist for therapists, which is a, kind of an unintentional niche, so to speak. But that is common feedback. People worked with a therapist. They did some good work, but then things kind of halted or got really surface level, and they found themselves craving depth, deeper connection, more introspection, and I would never say I'm better. It's not a comparison game of who's a better therapist. Different styles for different people. Um, but if people want depth, I can stare at depth in the face. That one's all good.
Thanks for sharing that.
Mhm.
You are a therapist and someone who speaks candidly about the messiness of being a therapist. Was there
Mhm.
ever a point where you felt like maybe this wasn't something that you wanted to do or couldn't do anymore?
I've definitely I've definitely struggled with it at different points in my career. I started this job very young. I always say I was the youngest person in my cohort for a long time. I was always like the youngest therapist on the team. And there's some insecurity with that. There's some like, do I have enough to bring to the table? Or are people going to take me seriously? I would certainly get those clients early on in my career of like, oh, like you could be my kid's age, or like I
Mm.
could be your grandma, those types of things. And, at the time I remember those just activating such a deep like shame and insecurity. Like I wasn't allowed to take space here in this role. And I've certainly worked with certain in certain settings or with certain clients where the work just felt really hard and it called me into question of like, am I good enough? Am I really able to help this person with this need, with this pain? And it's kind of known in this field that some of the jobs early on are, really high caseloads, not a lot of good training, not necessarily the best support. And so burnout's a really big problem in this profession. And I've certainly been through that and kind of felt the effects of that, which has made me question like, oh, should I just leave? Should I just do something else altogether? I haven't had that in a while, in a long time, actually, many years. But it was pretty concentrated early on, and I know that's actually really common for new therapists, and that's why I speak out a lot about it because it was at the time very taboo. I felt very alone in my experiences with it.
Mm. How did you learn how to not only hold space for others, but for yourself and to then allow for other therapists who may have been experiencing that same thing to also maybe step into that same platform where you were, to be able to differentiate, okay, well, we know this is hard and we know it's difficult, but we also have to care for ourselves.
The truth is I started making dumb memes on Instagram. It's the truth. Back in 2018, I started making memes about being a therapist on Instagram with no agenda beyond I'm just gonna start some like there was no real agenda there. I guess that was the agenda. And what I've learned through that, what I've said on other podcasts, other talks I've done is memes are funny, right? But what's really underneath the humor is what I learned is, oh, like I am so not the only one feeling this way. There is a shared
Mhm.
connectivity. People are liking my page, following this page, sharing my content because they resonate with it. I am speaking to things that so many of us feel. I didn't know we all feel this way. How nice. We're all feeling this way. That's so cool. So we're kind of breaking that taboo barrier. I know now with social media, there's more and more barriers just consistently being broken down. I actually think that's one beautiful thing of social media, even though there's a lot of downsides to these platforms. I do think that's one really nice thing, particularly as it pertains to mental health. Um, but I want to say that kind of bridged a really important gap of like, ooh, I'm feeling a little alone in this. And now I'm realizing others are. And I found that so healing 7 6 7 years ago when that page kind of first started. And speeding it up to the now, um, I know how to regulate myself. I know the spaces where I need to go when I'm feeling dysregulated, the coping skills I have, the support system I have, the grounding I have, and I pour into that so I can then be there to pour into my clients to hold the space very consistently and lovingly for them. That's my top priority.
Hmm, that sounds wonderful. I'm glad you started that page and that it was relatable for so many others to be able to come in and, laugh at something, but then also be like, yeah, that's true. Like, I do feel like that. Maybe that does need to be talked about more. And now your page is huge. And I think it's a landing space, like where somebody can take their shoes off and kind of just look at some things and laugh and relax and say, oh, yeah, that's true. And also give them a way to like acknowledge what they're feeling.
Yeah, I find that that is one of the depths that comes with like good comedy, right? We have that like we're laughing and then it's like, oh, because if we're not laughing, we're crying. And
Right.
there's some kind of like charge to that. And there's some kind of, oh, yeah, I feel that way. Oh, okay, that's being named. Like it's not just in me. And I just think for humans, it's so deeply validating.
Yeah, I agree. Let's talk about your book. Sometimes therapy is awkward because it's not just a book about therapy. It's about what it feels like to be human in a profession that often demands superhuman composure. What would you say was the hardest chapter for you to write?
I don't have the book in front of me, so I don't remember all the chapter names, but um, you know, all of it was hard.
Mm.
I'll just give you the broad strokes. All of it was hard because writing a book is hard and it requires sifting through a lot of the perfectionism that I talked about earlier and the fear of like, is anyone going to like what I'm going to have to say? Who am I to write about these topics? Who cares what I have to say? So, I mean, the long and the short of it was all of it was natural, all of it was genuine and from the heart, and all of it was equally hard because it's so hard to distill information and ideally try to like kind of curate and package it in a way where it feels accessible to the people reading it, where it relates to them. So all the chapters.
I think what you're doing and the way you're doing it is something that isn't usually looked at um, as something that's good or nice or fun. It's usually people look at it with a critical eye and have negative things to say about it. What was it that gave you the courage to be so open about it?
I think I did reach a point of inner trust and I've been also writing professionally for quite some time. So I was able to kind of rest on that, okay, I have skill set and expertise in writing. I am a therapist, so I do have, some competence here to stand behind my beliefs and my ideas. And then, like anything else, it's just that leap of faith. You just put something out there. You put art out there and you hope people like it, and you build enough trust to kind of believe, okay, well, if they don't, I'm just going to shoot my shot and still I'm going to be okay. And we often regret what we don't do rather than the things we
Mhm.
do. And I kind of had trust in the process, and it turned out in my favor. It worked out, and I'm grateful for that very much. So
Mm. I'm glad you did.
thank you.
What's something that you wish every new therapist knew starting out that nobody told you when you were starting?
Listen more than you talk.
Mhm.
um, you cannot be curious enough, like truly, truly curious. The moment you start assuming, you risk alienating, losing the plot. That's not to say you shouldn't start creating some reflections and conceptualizations in your mind. Those can help organize your thoughts, but you have to be very fluid. You have to be able to adapt a lot of times with each client, and attunement matters so much. And so with that, we want to get really quiet and we want to really focus on what's happening in the room, the here and now, the virtual screen if you're doing telehealth, um, and just listen deeply and find what's good in your clients, because there's so much, in grad school and all the books about like, what's wrong, what's the symptom, what's the pathology, what's the diagnosis. And yes, people are coming to us with pain, but they're humans, they're so whole, they're beautiful, they have such goodness to them. And it's so beautiful to be able to hold that mirror of like, here's all the things you're awesome at, like here's why, like, the world, like, nothing could ever replace you, and, like, I get to see that, and I get to, like, hold that with us. That's so cool, and just being able to embody that too. So that's a that's a lot I would tell a new therapist, but, they can read more of my books if they want information on that.
Thanks for sharing that the way you did. You've sat in a room with hundreds of clients. What has being a therapist taught you about people that you never expected you'd learn?
There's that kind of quote, I'm gonna butcher it, but it's that whole, idea of, like, just be kind because you never know what people are struggling with. I know that's not the exact quote, but we've all kind of heard that cliche, but it is so true. I mean, everybody's dealing with something. Like, we're all kind of holding some baggage, some fear, some trauma, some physical sickness, something, or many somethings. Everyone, like, no one's unscathed. And so much of us have to move through life masking it, compartmentalizing it, suppressing it. And that's for survival. That's not necessarily a bad thing. But in all this work, I am just constantly reminded of a lot of us are in pain, and yet it's so healing to just have a space where you can just be like listened to fully and cared for. Your pain is nurtured, even if it can't be fully fixed, even if it can't be fully solved. Someone's really stepping in and saying, "Ooh, I see it. Like, yeah, I don't want you to be alone in it, alone with it. So let me just hold your hand and help you."
What can it look like to see someone receive that when maybe they've never heard someone say that to them before or had someone hold space for them in a loving, compassionate way? Like what can that do to their nervous system? What can that do to their body? And what can that look like when someone actually feels that?
Mm. It's such a complicated answer because the generic answer is it feels so healing and it's so warm and it's a corrective emotional experience. And yes, it is those things, but often what's not talked about is there's a lot of discomfort that can sometimes
Mm.
come. Hypervigilance shows up, the whole like, can I trust you? You're just paid to say that. You don't really like me. You could hurt me. The the old wounds often get pretty activated and pretty sharp, and it can be very disorienting. I do a lot of work with trauma, so I see that quite a bit. That doesn't happen with every client, but yes, because it's so unfamiliar, at times it can feel very uneasy. Like the logical part of you is like, ah, this feels so nice. And the emotional part is like, oh, this is dangerous. Um, and so with the nervous system, it can be a lot of trying to co-regulate and then attempt to self-regulate what's happening within the nervous system. And it tends to be slow work and lots of consistent experiences of trying to provide that safety and that warmth. Because it can be hard for a client to take that in, especially if they've had, histories of rejection, betrayal, abuse. Like to feel safe is threatening because why would you want to let your guard down?
I think it's crazy that feeling safe can be a threat, but I also understand why and how. What does trauma do to the brain and the body to where something as natural as feeling safe feels threatening?
Ah, I'm trying to avoid getting into all the neuroscience for it because that risks losing some of our audience here. But essentially, um, if you haven't have excuse me, if you have not had safety modeled to you, you are wired to detect threat. And a lot of times what we see is that there is such a baked in hypervigilance of, oh, I know you're gonna hurt me. Like even when I trusted people, they hurt me. Even when I didn't trust people, they hurt me. And so you're wired almost to detect threat. So how does that show up? It shows up sometimes with a lot of anxiety, like needing lots of reassurance, needing lots of proof. I don't like the word, but like that idea of like testing loyalty kind of coming up. Or it shows in more withdrawal, like avoidance, like I'm not going to get close to you. I'm not going to really open up. I'm not going to want to go deep because like I I don't want that from you. I don't want intimacy. I don't want closeness. Like you are safer at a distance. I want that power and control. And then people sometimes kind of, alternate through both. That kind of push pull can show up. And it's really important for therapists to understand that and be able to sit with it and hold it and not pathologize or shame a client for it because I'm often telling clients like, yeah, I totally understand why you don't trust me. Especially like early on in treatment, like why should you trust me with all your vulnerabilities and fears and like worst stories ever? Like who the f- am I? You know? And that's where it takes a lot of time and a lot of rapport building and the human relational experience. So their nervous system does start to settle and starts to say, oh, okay, like maybe she could be someone that's safe. We're gonna feel it out and we're gonna do, a few little low stakes efforts at opening up and seeing how those land. And so it's kind of that trial and error, that little tango that can be danced with at times. That's a very long-winded answer, and I hope it kind of breaks
No,
it down.
it was great. I'm so glad you said it the way you did because it's difficult to trust. It's difficult to be vulnerable. It's difficult to open up. And
Yeah.
so when somebody starts therapy, of course they're going to feel like, why would I want to trust you? Who are you? I'm just paying you to say something like somebody could be going to therapy because they have to and not
Yeah.
because they necessarily want to. So
Yeah.
that's even more reason not to open up. But for those people who genuinely are searching for something more, are searching for healing and go to therapy or come to see you, with all the work that you're doing to help people, what is it that you want people to know most?
Mm. I do always want people to know that a healing is possible. And what I mean by that is that I don't believe we reach a state of just pure nirvana and total relief at all times that would negate and even kind of gaslight the human experience. Like pain is real and suffering is real. And the goal is not to feel happy at all times. But it is rewarding and virtuous to be able to access that full range of emotion, to be able to be vulnerable with yourself, with others, to feel kind of aligned in just who you are, accepting of who you are. And these are all moving targets, and some days it's easier than others. Um, but that it is all possible, and that whatever happened in our past And there's horrific things that often have happened in our past. We do not forget them, and we still get triggered by them at times, but they do not have to completely define the present and the future. And I think holding on to that hope is essential in this work.
Thank you for that. I love the passion that you have because you can tell that it comes from such a deep, genuine, authentic place, and you're not just talking just to talk. So thank you for doing what you do the way you do it. If there was one thing in particular that you could be known for or that would define your legacy, what would you want that to be?
My first thought is just loving on people hard. It's
Mm,
honestly like just loving on people hard. Um, because a lot of people feel really unlovable and feel really unworthy in this world. And love is also vulnerable, right? It's scary. And I think a lot of us walk around being like, oof, if they really knew me, um, they'd hate me, they'd reject me. And so more than anything, that would be the best legacy to be able to have.
mm. I think that's a great legacy. All right, last question for you. If you could use your platform to educate anyone who might be struggling with their mental or emotional health and might be uncertain of how or where to start, what would you say?
Mm. Because I'm a therapist, I will always advocate for trying therapy, for seeking it out, for taking that first step. What I tell people is that doesn't mean you have to make the step right away. There's something to be said about just maybe the first step is looking at your options, looking at a couple websites, um, look looking at your insurance if you're going to use your insurance, seeing okay, let me see what my options are there. Um, Starting really small, really gentle, because basically what you're trying to do is say like I'm opening kind of a catalyst for change, for bettering myself. So, if therapy is the option that you want to pursue, but it feels too overwhelming to start right away, it's just okay. What's that very, very first preliminary baby step that you could take? And maybe it's finding a couple therapists and just emailing them, setting up consultations, even if you don't want to do them yet. Just putting that effort out there. Um, that would be my first step of advice.
Thank you for that. Thank you for this, Nicole. I've had the pleasure of sitting with you, and not only that, going through your Instagram and looking at all the memes that you post and your book. And um, I think what you do is really special, and the way that you do it, the way that you show the humanness about therapy, not only to clients but to other therapists, is wonderful. So thank you.
Thank you.
If people want to find you online or on social media, where can they find you?
On social media, I can be found on psychotherapy memes and my website and all my other clinical offerings, books, services, NicoleArzt.com.
Okay, perfect. Well, again, thank you for this. Thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for who you are. Thank you for what you do. And thank you for the way you do it.
Thank you very much.